Usually you get a script and you have to sort of tinker with it. You gotta develop the character more. There's huge plot holes, and this was kind of a flawless script, you know?
Suppose you're a lover of the crime genre. We bet that you enjoy a good plot full of secrets, tension, and mind games. You enjoy trying to figure out who is lying, who is telling the truth, and what unexpected plot twist is coming up. The Departed is one of those movies, and it's packed with a fantastic cast of veteran actors. Leonardo DiCaprio, Matt Damon, Jack Nicholson, Mark Wahlberg, and Alec Baldwin. With a cast like that, you can guess things behind the scenes were anything but normal. Martin Scorsese directed a script so detailed that it received 6 nominations each at the 64th Golden Globe Awards. So here is the question. How did these actors prepare for roles that were full of stress, danger, and double lives? Who changed lines right on set without warning anyone? And what real-life Boston gangster inspired parts of the story? There is a lot about this movie that most people are unaware of. So let's get into it. A Hollywood reimagining of Infernal Affairs.
Any Martin Scorsese movie, a remake, because he kind of reinvents whatever he touches as a director.
Did you know that The Departed was inspired by the Hong Kong movie Infernal Affairs, which was released 4 years earlier? Both films tell the same story about a cop pretending to be a criminal and a criminal pretending to be a cop, but the storytelling style and emotional experience the actors went through feel completely different. The setup in both films operates in the same manner. In Infernal Affairs, a crime boss named Han Sam plants a young guy named Lau into the police academy so he can spy for the gang. At the same time, the police kick out a cadet named Chan from the academy so that he can go undercover and spy on Han Sam's gang. 10 years pass, and both guys are exhausted from living double lives. Chan worries he is slowly turning into a criminal after spending so much time with gangsters. Lau, on the other hand, genuinely enjoys being a respected police officer and wishes he could just cut ties with the gang forever. The Departed does the same thing, but is set in Boston. Irish mob boss Frank Costello meets a young man named Colin Sullivan and raises him to be his inside man in the police force. Meanwhile, Billy Costigan gets recruited from the police academy to go undercover in Costello's crew. Both guys end up stuck in the same nightmare as Chan and Lau, pretending to be someone they are not every single day, never knowing if today's the day they get caught and unalived. Where things get interesting is how each movie pulls you into the plot. Infernal Affairs is fast. People lose their lives suddenly, violence comes out of nowhere, and you are constantly trying to keep up with who knows what and who is fooling whom. For example, when Chan's boss, Wong, gets thrown off a rooftop, it happens quickly. When Chan himself gets shot in an elevator by another mole named Big B, it happens fast too, and the next thing we see is the next scene. The Departed, however, works differently. Martin Scorsese wants you to feel the emotions the characters go through all the time. He puts you inside Billy Costigan's head and makes you understand what it genuinely feels like to wake up every morning knowing you are surrounded by people who would take your life without thinking twice. Throughout the course of the movie, you then realize that Costigan's mental health is gradually falling apart. We see him talking to a psychiatrist because the stress is making him lose his mind. We watch him take medications and sweat through meetings with Costello, terrified that today's the day his cover gets blown. Both movies have scenes where you almost think it's the day when they figure out who they are. For example, in Infernal Affairs, Lau and Chan both get assigned to find the mole on their side, which means they are on a hunt for each other without realizing it. Lau then starts following Wong to catch him meeting with Chan. Chan, on the other hand, starts trying to figure out who in the police keeps warning Han Sam about their raids. According to DiCaprio, you cannot explicitly refer to The Departed as a remake. When you see just how perfectly the plot of The Departed fits together, how each scene is written with rhythm and tension, you're already impressed by the craftsmanship. This is why the movie sticks with you after those long years. The director never watched the original. If you were remaking a movie from the past, the first instinct would be to watch the original version over and over until you knew every scene by heart. You would study the camera angles, memorize the dialogue, and try to understand exactly what made it work. But that's not what happened with The Departed. William Monahan, who wrote the screenplay, refused to watch Infernal Affairs at all. He didn't want the Hong Kong film stuck in his head while he was writing. Instead, he just read the translated script and used that as his guide. He stuck close to it too, following the same basic structure and plot points. Later, people noticed that some things he added seemed like they might have come from Infernal Affairs 2 and 3, but Monahan said he never read those sequels until after The Departed was released. Once Monahan finished the script, it landed on Martin Scorsese's desk. Scorsese was the obvious choice if a studio wanted to make a crime movie that would win awards and get taken seriously. The script was also sent to Leonardo DiCaprio, who had just collaborated with Scorsese on Gangs of New York and The Aviator. Both men read it on the same day, and the next day they called each other to confirm they were both in. What's surprising is that Scorsese, who has watched more movies than most people could name, hadn't seen Infernal Affairs yet either, but he didn't need to. The setup of an undercover cop dealing with a mobster reminded him of White Heat, the 1949 James Cagney classic. This decision to approach the script without watching the original eventually led to the creation of the most excellent movie. Scorsese's long-awaited victory. Is it weird that a world-class director never won an Oscar after years and years of nominations? Martin Scorsese had made some of the best movies anyone had ever seen. Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, Goodfellas, Mean Streets. Movies that changed what people thought movies could be. Movies that other directors studied like textbooks. And every time the Oscars came around, Scorsese would show up in his tuxedo and watch someone else walk up to that stage and give a speech. It happened so many times that it stopped being surprising. Strangers would stop him in elevators and doctors' offices and tell him he deserved to win. Then in 2007, 26 years after his first nomination for Raging Bull, it finally happened. The Departed won Best Picture and Scorsese won Best Director. When they called his name, he got a standing ovation so loud they couldn't hear anything else. People were whistling and losing their minds. Scorsese walked up to the microphone and said, "Could you double-check the envelope?" Because even he couldn't quite believe it was real. DiCaprio's difficult choice. Leonardo DiCaprio wasn't sure which role he wanted to play at first. There were two main parts in The Departed: the undercover cop infiltrating the mob and the mob's mole inside the police, both of whom were intriguing characters to play. Scorsese decided to help DiCaprio and told him to play Billy Costigan, the undercover cop who infiltrates Frank Costello's organization. The flip side, however, is that this role genuinely scared DiCaprio the most. DiCaprio described playing the character as experiencing a constant 24-hour panic attack, and that is not actor hyperbole. DiCaprio is the gentle demigod and describes himself as a man who isn't violent, so it was a bit nerve-wracking having to embody a violent character.
You have to amp yourself up to it, because it's nerve-wracking thinking that, you know, you're going to do sequences like that, because I'm not a violent human being whatsoever.
The search for Colin Sullivan.
It was actually beyond my wildest possible daydream that I'd be doing a movie with...
In a question and answer session, Matt Damon explained that playing the role of Colin Sullivan was beyond his wildest possible daydream. Additionally, his Boston background provided him with insight into portraying a character from that region. So how did he get this role? Once DiCaprio was locked in as Billy Costigan, Scorsese needed to figure out who would play his counterpart, Colin Sullivan, the criminal working as a mole inside the Massachusetts State Police. This role is challenging because Colin must appear genuine enough to deceive everyone around him while also harboring a secret that could destroy everything he has built. Brad Pitt had been involved with the project early on when it was still coming together, but when DiCaprio signed on to play Billy, Pitt stepped away from the project. Pitt thought Billy's counterpart should be played by someone younger, someone closer to DiCaprio's age, because the dynamic between the two characters works better if they appear to be from the same generation. Pitt and DiCaprio are about 11 years apart in age, which doesn't sound like much, but 11 years apart means they grew up in slightly different eras, listened to other music, and watched various movies as kids. If you're trying to create this mirror image effect where one cop is pretending to be a criminal and one criminal is pretending to be a cop, having them be roughly the same age strengthens that reflection. When Pitt stepped away from playing the role, Matt Damon came into the picture. Damon is only 4 years older than DiCaprio, but what genuinely convinced Scorsese of Damon was his attitude. Scorsese felt that Damon had the confidence that would be perfect for the role of Colin Sullivan. Jack Nicholson rewrites Frank Costello. The role of mob boss Frank Costello should have been easy to cast. This is Martin Scorsese making a crime movie, and there is no shortage of great actors who would kill to work with him on that kind of script. Scorsese's first choice was Al Pacino, which would have been incredible. Pacino had been cast in The Godfather, Scarface, and Carlito's Way. He was, in fact, another demigod when it came to playing criminals, and having him as Costello would have brought instant credibility and menace to the role. Pacino, however, wasn't interested. He had been involved in way too many gangster movies and was trying to avoid being typecast. So Scorsese offered the role to Jack Nicholson instead. Nicholson is one of those actors who can do anything, comedy, drama, hero, or villain, and make it look easy. He played the Joker in Tim Burton's 1989 film Batman and won Oscars for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Terms of Endearment. Unfortunately, when Nicholson read the script for The Departed, he turned it down because he did not like the story. Jack Nicholson felt the Frank Costello character was heavily underwritten, so Scorsese promised Nicholson they would expand the character and let him bring his ideas to it, and this changed the trajectory of his character, so much so that it affected Matt Damon. Nicholson made the character so aggressively sexual that it created a problem for Matt Damon. If Costello was going to be this hypersexual predator figure, what should Colin Sullivan be? Damon then suggested going in the opposite direction with his character. They added moments throughout the film where it's implied that Colin is impotent, that he can't perform sexually even though he is in a relationship with the psychiatrist, Madeline.
You see what's up on screen. He is completely an unpredictable actor. He's a force of nature. You have to...
For DiCaprio, however, working with Nicholson became part of the process of playing Billy Costigan. DiCaprio knew going into any scene with Nicholson that he should expect extreme spontaneity, with Nicholson being the kind of person who might do something completely different from what they had rehearsed. This eventually helped him play his character, and if you take a second look at some of the scenes, you would realize the fear on DiCaprio's face in those scenes isn't all acting. Some of it is genuine anxiety over what Jack Nicholson might do in the next 5 seconds. Finding the right cops. In The Departed, only 2 people in the police force know Billy Costigan's real identity. They are Captain Queenan and Staff Sergeant Dignam, and they are the only ones who can bring Billy back in from the cold when things get out of control. These roles mattered a lot to Scorsese because they needed to feel like real-life Boston cops. Unfortunately, there was a little hiccup with casting the perfect characters for this role. Martin Scorsese had a vision for these parts. He wanted to make it a Goodfellas reunion by casting Robert De Niro and Ray Liotta, the 2 actors who had helped make that movie a masterpiece in 1990. At the time, De Niro was preparing to direct his movie The Good Shepherd, a spy thriller about the CIA, and he couldn't commit to acting in The Departed simultaneously. Liotta, on the other hand, had scheduling conflicts with other projects. As a result, both actors had to decline, leaving Scorsese with no choice but to find 2 new actors to play the cops. Initially, an Irish actor named Gerard McSorley was cast as Captain Queenan first. He took the job seriously too, meeting with local Boston police officers to research the part, learning how they talked, moved, and thought about their work. Then Scorsese suddenly changed his mind and decided to go in a different direction. This new perspective eventually put Martin Sheen into the picture. As Queenan, Sheen becomes the one person Billy can turn to, the one person who genuinely cares whether Billy lives or dies. So when Queenan gets thrown off a building later in the movie, it hurts more because Sheen made you believe he was protecting Billy, not just because it was his job, but because he genuinely cared about this kid whose life he had put in danger. The role of Staff Sergeant Dignam, the second cop, ran into even more problems. Dennis Leary was initially offered the role, but he was unable to accept it. So Scorsese had no choice but to provide it to Mark Wahlberg. But Wahlberg didn't want the role, especially after he read the script and felt the same way Nicholson had felt about Costello. Scorsese then had to convince Wahlberg to take the role, promising to rework the character and make it fit. This eventually turned out to be another best thing that happened to The Departed. Sergeant Dignam then becomes the only person who is entirely and aggressively honest about everything. And this makes the ending of the movie, when Dignam shows up at Colin Sullivan's apartment, feel like justice finally arrives. Captain Ellerby and the aviator connection. Martin Scorsese still needed to cast Captain Ellerby, another police officer who works alongside Queenan and Dignam. This wasn't as crucial a role as the others, but it still mattered because Ellerby needed to feel like someone who had been a cop long enough to have seen everything. And Scorsese's first choice was Mel Gibson. Gibson had been a massive action star in the 80s and 90s with films like Lethal Weapon and Mad Max. He had also won Oscars for directing Braveheart, and having him in The Departed would have brought another layer of star power to an already stacked cast. However, Gibson was busy working on Apocalypto, his movie about the Mayan civilization, which he was directing and producing. Making that film consumed all his time and energy, so he had to turn down Scorsese's offer. Eventually, the role went to Alec Baldwin. Baldwin had just worked with DiCaprio on The Aviator, another Scorsese film where DiCaprio played Howard Hughes. What's interesting about the Captain Ellerby role is that it didn't require the same kind of character rebuilding that Costello or Dignam needed. The Secret X. If you're a first-timer, you might not realize that not all the characters seem to make it to the end of the movie, even though it feels like they are free from any sort of danger. Well, Scorsese decided to plant an X near anyone doomed to kick the bucket down the line. Sometimes it appears in dark shapes against a wall, and at other times you find it reflected in the window behind them. Scorsese didn't come up with this on his own. He was inspired by the 1932 film Scarface, where Howard Hawks occasionally dropped that hint first. He had seen it as a playful nod to the past, to honor an older classic. So the next time you're glued to The Departed, don't miss the X. One and done. Sometimes a movie does so well that studios start thinking, let us make a whole series and maybe even build a theme park ride. However, The Departed was not made to be dragged out like that, and Martin Scorsese protected it. Even though the film won 4 Oscars, including Best Picture in 2007, Scorsese refused to turn it into a franchise. In an interview with Gentleman's Quarterly, GQ, he explained that the studio only cared about making more money, not about the story or the characters. They even suggested that one of the main characters should survive, and they did not seem to care who it was, despite the ending being famous for its shocking and far-reaching consequences. That idea did not align with the film's message, which focuses on trust, betrayal, and the dangers of double lives. Scorsese respected that more profound meaning, so he chose to end The Departed with one movie instead of stretching it until it lost its heart. After disagreeing with the studio, he left Warner Brothers and went on to work with Paramount on his subsequent films. Creating the love triangle. In Infernal Affairs, the two main characters have separate love interests that never overlap. The crooked cop Lau Kin-ming is engaged to a woman named Mary. She's his fiancée, the person with whom he is building a legitimate life while secretly working for the Triad. Meanwhile, the undercover cop Chan Wing-yan has regular appointments with a therapist named Lee Sum-yi. He falls for her even though she is already in a relationship with someone else. William Monahan examined this setup and made a decision that altered the entire emotional core of the movie. He combined those two characters into one person, Dr. Madeline Madden. Now, Billy Costigan, the undercover cop, falls for his therapist, who also happens to be in a serious relationship with Colin Sullivan, the crooked cop working for the mob. So, when Billy and Madeline start their affair, it adds another layer of betrayal to a movie already drowning in lies and deception. Scorsese needed to cast someone who could pull off this complicated role, someone who could be professional enough to seem like a psychiatrist, but also human enough to make terrible decisions and cross every ethical line imaginable. Initially, he considered Emily Blunt, who was just starting to break through as an actress, Hilary Swank, who had already won 2 Oscars, and Kate Winslet, who had been nominated for multiple Oscars and was one of the most respected actresses working. He even considered Jennifer Aniston, who was married to Brad Pitt at the time, but Scorsese ended up casting Vera Farmiga, who was relatively unknown at the time but had impressed him with her work in a 2004 movie called Down to the Bone. While Farmiga was trying to figure out how to approach playing Madeline, she decided to show the script to a police psychiatrist to get their professional opinion on whether the character made sense. The psychiatrist, in response, thought none of it was sensible. To the psychiatrist, there was no way a police psychiatrist would interact with a patient the way Madeline does with Billy. She wouldn't behave that way professionally, and she definitely wouldn't sleep with him because everything Madeline does in the movie violates the basic ethics of her profession. When Farmiga then realized how far outside the ethical norm Madeline is, she became even more interested in playing the character. The pregnancy later in the film, where she doesn't even know if Billy or Colin is the father, becomes this perfect symbol of how complicated and wrong everything has gotten. Monahan's decision to combine two characters into one created a moral disaster at the center of the movie, and Farmiga made that disaster feel genuine and painful, rather than merely convenient for the plot. Method, research, and preparation. Making a movie about Boston criminals and Boston cops requires more than just good acting. You need to understand how these people talk, move, and behave. Leonardo DiCaprio took this seriously. He went to Boston and met with individuals allegedly connected to the Irish mob. The actors playing police officers went through their own research process. They met with Boston police officers to learn how they carried themselves, how they interacted with each other, and what their daily lives were like. Boston police have a distinct culture and attitude that differs from those of police in New York, Los Angeles, or elsewhere. They needed to get that right or the whole movie would feel fake. The production even brought in a technical advisor named Thomas Duffy, who had just retired as a major in the Massachusetts State Police. Duffy had decades of experience and could tell the actors exactly how things worked. Matt Damon took his research even further. He got to ride along on a police raid of a crack house. The police took precautions because they didn't want a famous actor getting shot during their raid. As a result, they brought along twice as many officers as they would typically take. They also kept Damon, who was wearing a bulletproof vest, behind all of them the entire time. Nicholson's improvisations. Jack Nicholson didn't just play Frank Costello. He rebuilt the character scene by scene and often made things up on the spot that nobody expected. The most famous example is the scene where Costello is talking to Billy Costigan about rats and moles. They are sitting at a table and Costello talks about having this feeling that someone is betraying him. Then suddenly, without warning, Costello pulls out a firearm and points it right in Billy's face. That scene wasn't in the script. Nicholson improvised it. DiCaprio wasn't expecting it, and his reaction, that split second of genuine fear in his eyes, is entirely authentic. The famous line, "I got this rat," this gnawing, teething, fucking rat, that Costello delivers in that scene was also improvised by Nicholson. He came up with it on set to describe the paranoia eating at Costello. Scorsese loved what Nicholson did in that scene. Years later, he said, "I still get chills when Jack says, 'I got this rat.'" The baseball cap controversy. Sometimes the most minor details become the most significant problems on a movie set. There's a scene in The Departed where we see Frank Costello wearing a New York Yankees baseball cap. It is a minor costume choice, just a hat that helps establish who this character is. But that Yankees cap was supposed to be a Boston Red Sox cap. The Red Sox cap was vital because it was a signature look of Whitey Bulger, the bona fide Boston mob boss who inspired the Frank Costello character. Bulger was famous in Boston, and part of his look included wearing Red Sox gear, as he was a proper Bostonian through and through, loyal to the city and its teams. But Jack Nicholson refused point blank to wear a Red Sox cap because he did not like the Boston Red Sox. The script that changed everything. William Monahan came from Boston, which mattered because he was familiar with the city and its unique culture of crime and corruption. Before The Departed, he had written only one screenplay that was translated into a movie directed by Ridley Scott, a historical epic named Kingdom of Heaven in 2005. That movie was about the Crusades and medieval warfare, as far from Boston crime as you can get. So when Monahan wrote The Departed, he was still relatively unproven as a screenwriter. More so, studios and directors taking a chance on his script was a bigger risk than it might seem. But the script was so good that it immediately convinced the two most important people who read it. When the studio sent it to Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio, both men were blown away. They had just worked together on Gangs of New York and The Aviator, so they had this pattern of reading scripts and discussing whether they wanted to collaborate again. Usually, that process takes time, but not this time. Scorsese remembered. Leo and I had the script and said we would read it and then talk a week later. The next day, Leo called and said, "If you're in, I'm in." And I said I was going to call you and say the same thing. DiCaprio explained the script grabbed his attention because it was so well written, and it was one of the only screenplays he read where he had no notes. Scorsese's cinema references. Martin Scorsese isn't just a great director, he is one of cinema's most outstanding students. He has watched thousands of movies from every era and every country, and he possesses encyclopedic knowledge of film history that he constantly draws upon. The Departed is packed with references to older films, connecting Scorsese's work to the tradition of crime movies that preceded him. Towards the end of the film, Billy Costigan sends a CD to Colin Sullivan's apartment containing evidence of Sullivan's corruption. Madeline finds the CD and plays it while Sullivan is in the shower. We see 3 shots of Sullivan turning on the shower, water starting to spray, and his hand adjusting the temperature. Those 3 shots are direct copies of the shots when Janet Leigh turns on the shower in the famous scene from Alfred Hitchcock's movie Psycho in 1960. Anyone who knows that movie recognizes the reference immediately. By copying those exact shots, Scorsese is telling us that Sullivan is about to be destroyed. The other primary reference is more subtle but just as meaningful. In the original Scarface from 1932, directed by Howard Hawks, the main character, Tony Camonte, has a signature habit. Whenever he takes a life, he whistles music from an opera called Lucia di Lammermoor by Italian composer Gaetano Donizetti. The story behind the opera tells a tale of clashing households, a forbidden romance, manipulation, and a woman, Lucia, who on her wedding night snaps and ends everyone's life, much like the grim twist in The Departed, where fate drags everyone down. In The Departed, Frank Costello goes to see a performance of that same opera. On-set tensions. Not everyone had a great time making The Departed. Most of the cast loved working with each other and with Scorsese, but there were some notable exceptions where personalities clashed and people just didn't get along. Ray Winstone, the British actor who played Costello's right-hand man, Frenchie, had a problem with Jack Nicholson. Everyone else on set seemed to worship Nicholson, treated him like the legend he is, but Winstone couldn't connect with him. He was honest about it later in interviews. "Me and Jack did not get on too well. Maybe he was going through a funny time. Everyone else loves him to death. I just wanted him to be a great guy. We just did not click." But it wasn't just Ray. Mark Wahlberg also had his issues with Martin Scorsese. Scorsese is almost universally praised by actors who work with him. He is patient, supportive, and knows how to elicit great performances from people. But Wahlberg found the experience difficult. He said, "I had problems with Marty. He was pushing me in different ways." At the end of the day, Wahlberg was the only cast member who got nominated for an Oscar for The Departed. It was his first ever Oscar nomination, which must have felt vindicating after a challenging shoot. The controversial rat ending. The final shot of The Departed has become one of the most debated moments in modern cinema. After Dignam takes a shot at Colin Sullivan in the head, the camera doesn't cut to black right away. Instead, it moves out through the window of Sullivan's apartment, and we see a rat scurrying along the balcony railing. The rat walks across the frame, pauses for a moment as if looking back at the dead man inside, then disappears as the screen goes dark. Some people see this shit as Scorsese putting a visual metaphor that drives home everything the story has been about. Sullivan was a rat, an informant, and a traitor. For the others on this side of the spectrum, however, it just did not resonate with them. They found it too obvious and too heavy-handed. The controversy became so serious that in 2008 people started a petition and even a Kickstarter campaign to raise money to remove the rat from that final shot digitally. They wanted to re-edit the ending, take out the rat, and let the movie end on Dignam walking away. The campaign, however, never raised enough money, and it ultimately came to nothing. Grueling production. Making The Departed nearly broke Martin Scorsese, and that's not an exaggeration. This is a director who had been making intense, demanding films for decades, who had survived the chaos of Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, Goodfellas, and Casino. He knew how to handle challenging shoots, long hours, and the stress of managing huge casts and complicated scenes. But something about The Departed pushed him past his limits. This was mainly because the production had a long reenactment of reality. so they needed to be practical and experienced about it, for example, bringing in Tom Duffy. That kind of expertise was valuable for keeping the movie grounded in reality, but it also meant there was constant pressure to get every detail right. Filming took approximately 4 months, from mid-April 2005 to late August 2005. Some sources say shooting officially began on April 18th, while others say April 21, but either way, it was a long spring and summer of intense work. The production even had to split its time between Boston and New York, spending about 6 weeks in Boston filming exterior location shots to capture the city, then moving to New York for interior scenes, as New York offered better tax incentives and easier logistics for building sets. By the end of it, Scorsese was physically and mentally exhausted. He even referred to The Departed as moral ground zero, explaining that all the characters are killed at the end and there was no place to go after that. He had spent months immersed in this world of corruption, betrayal, and violence, and the darkness had almost seeped into him. He said, "I hardly did any press for that film because I was tired of it. It was maddening. I liked the picture, but the process of making it was highly unpleasant. I don't care how much I'm being paid, it'll kill me and I'll die." Critical and commercial triumph. Despite the difficulty of its creation, The Departed succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. The movie cost around $90 million to produce, which is a substantial budget but not large enough by Hollywood standards for a crime drama with that number of major stars. It ended up grossing $291.5 million worldwide, more than triple its budget. The critical response was even more overwhelming. When award season came around, The Departed dominated. At the 79th Academy Awards in 2007, the movie won 4 Oscars. It won Best Picture and Best Director for Martin Scorsese, his first and to date only personal Oscar win. It won Best Adapted Screenplay for William Monahan, and it won Best Film Editing for Thelma Schoonmaker, who had been Scorsese's editor for decades. Years from now, people will still watch The Departed and feel their stomachs drop when Billy Costigan steps out of that elevator. They will still laugh at Dignam's insults, flinch at Costello's violence, and feel sick about the love triangle that destroys everyone involved. They will still argue about whether that rat at the end ruins the movie or perfects it, because that's what great movies do. What do you think? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel.